Hello, friends, and welcome to our second Power to Inspire Awards event. I'm Jill Savitt, the CEO of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Before we begin, I want to thank our board of directors, led by former Mayor of Atlanta, Shirley Franklin. And I also want to thank our co-chairs for this event, AJ Robinson and Nicole Ellerine, Verna and Bill Cleveland, and Chris Womack. And finally, our host committee chairs, Brian Tollison and Imara Kennedy. Finally, last of the thanks but not least, our donors who are listed on the screen. As many of you know, the center is still closed due to the coronavirus. Our donors make it possible for us to carry on our mission. In normal times, our budget is largely supported by our ticket revenue, so we are deeply grateful to the support of our donor partners. This work that we do has never been more important. There is no greater proof of this, perhaps, than the backdrop of pain and injustice in our country right now, because of the recent murders of Black men and women by vigilantes and law enforcement. There is deep, deep suffering right now in our land, and there is despair manifesting itself in protests that have included violence because of the lack of accountability and justice for these deaths. Like racial discrimination more broadly, this pain and injustice is not new. It has been with us since the founding of our country. The murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor are just the most recent reminders that we live in an unjustly unequal society. Had their deaths not been captured on film, many people would have just gone about their lives, as we have so many times before. The explosion of outrage and grief we are seeing in cities across the country is really a predictable result of unpunished crimes. I believe nonviolence is always the best response, both morally and strategically, but Dr. King can give us some perspective on what we're seeing. He said, "Riots are the language of the unheard." This outpouring we see is not only about the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. It's Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and what has become a tragically long list of victims. And it's not just about these deaths, I believe. It is also about what we're seeing from the coronavirus. COVID-19 has made starkly clear that some people in our country are more safe than others. The disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on African Americans, on immigrants, and poor people makes it deadly clear that one's security in America is largely determined by your race and your income. That is not how democracy is supposed to work. Democracy is supposed to recognize everyone as equal before the law, that we are all born with rights and dignity, and that our government and law enforcement officials are obligated to protect those rights. This is our social contract, the agreement between the government and the governed, and it is our leaders' fundamental duty to keep people safe. Our democracy is broken. And the question is, what do we do now? Can we change this dangerous path that we're on? The simple answer is yes, and it's really the only answer. We can, and we must. And we do know how. The exhibitions in our center tell the story of how committed individuals have transformed our country, ending segregation under the law. Our exhibitions tell how advocates around the world are waging campaigns for freedom. Human rights provide the way forward, but only if we act. Change will come only when we the people, all of us, demand it. So perhaps many of you are unsure about where you might start, and the center is ready to help. Next week, we are launching a campaign. It's called the Campaign for Equal Dignity. We've been planning this campaign since we closed our doors in March as a response to the impact of the coronavirus on specific communities. This campaign has only become more critical and more timely. Our goal is to galvanize people, you and me and our friends and our family and their friends and their family, to demand equality for all. Next week, you're going to receive an email from us, and we will ask you to take a pledge to affirm your commitment to equal rights, the right to health security, to safe voting, to economic stability, quality education, and justice. Protection of these rights is what protects democracy. After you sign this pledge, we are then going to ask you to contact each of your elected leaders and ask them to join you in signing this pledge, to ask them to commit to upholding the rights and dignity of everyone. We'll make this easy for you by providing you contact information and some ideas about what you can write and say. Think about it. When was the last time you contacted your county commissioner, your city council member, your mayor, your state representative, your congressperson, or your senators? They need to hear from you, from all of us. Our elected leaders work for us, and they will respond to the will of the people, but only if enough of us work together to express it. The week after next, we're going to be in touch again, and the week after that, and so on. And we will provide you with a series of other ways for you to flex your civic muscles and use the power of your voice. We'll have online programs and conversations and trainings about what it means to be a human rights advocate. I hope you will join us. I want to say a special word to my fellow white people. George Floyd was killed because he was Black, and the same is true for all of the other people I mentioned. All of their killers were white. White people right now have a special responsibility to demand justice, to make clear these killers do not represent us and our values. Our African-American friends are tired of doing this work alone, and they are just plain tired. We need to stand together with them as human beings and people of conscience. Dr. King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. The division and inequality in our country won't be solved overnight, but I guarantee you it won't be solved at all unless we act together to reanimate our core national values of a government by the people, for the people, that demands the promise of equality and justice for all is made real for everyone. This idea of we the people is particularly appropriate for our awards ceremony this morning, and our honoree's presence with us is serendipitous. Katie Fahey, our honoree, leads an organization called The People, and its mission is to help all of us engage in the political process and have a meaningful say in the decisions that affect our lives. The theme of our Power to Inspire award this year is The March Continues, and we are presenting our award to Katie because she is following in the footsteps of the leaders of the civil rights movement in making sure everyone in America is able to have a voice and a vote. Her story is the inspiration we need right now. Take a look at this video about Katie Fahey.
Katie Fahey is making her difference at the ballot box. In 2016, the then 26-year-old activist began a grassroots quest to stop partisan gerrymandering across her state. It began with a Facebook post. After the election of Donald Trump, she wrote a simple post that said, quote, "I'd like to take on gerrymandering in Michigan. If you're interested in doing this as well, please let me know," end quote. Through that, her activism was born, and within hours of that post, Voters, Not Politicians was founded. Leading the group, Fahey organized thousands of volunteers who collected 425,000 signatures in support of an amendment to make gerrymandering in Michigan illegal. The campaign brought in millions of dollars and a lawsuit seeking to stop her in her tracks. But the effort passed. Now, as executive director of a nonpartisan group called The People, Fahey is committed to getting voters involved in the political process. She's hoping the momentum that helped her home state outlaw gerrymandering can be replicated to stop the practice in 35 other states. And this year, her story was the subject of a documentary called Slay the Dragon. It was focused on her effort to stop politicians from rigging ballot boxes across the nation.
Hi, Katie. Welcome. It is my honor to present you with our Power to Inspire Award.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm going to ask Katie some questions, and then we'll open up the conversation to all of you. And you can use the chat feature on Zoom to type in a question, and after Katie and I talk for a bit, we'll get to your questions for her. So, Katie, you decide to take on partisan gerrymandering. We have a range of people on this call today, young and old. Can you just briefly describe what gerrymandering is?
Yeah, so when we go to the ballot box to vote for people, we vote for different levels of elected officials who represent us, both in our state capitol and in Washington, D.C. These lines get redrawn once every 10 years after the census. This year is a census year, so if you haven't filled out your census, make sure you do so you get counted and your neighbors get counted in your community. But that census, after that happens, the lines get redrawn to determine which communities will vote together to have a representative. Gerrymandering is when drawing those lines, instead of focusing on, okay, how can we make sure we keep communities together so their voices can be heard and I can actually represent them as an elected official in the state capitol and in Washington, D.C. Politicians instead look and see, okay, what if I know that these voters are Democrat, or I know that these voters are Republican, so I like that or I don't like that. I'm going to draw them out of this district so that I can get more voters that will make sure that I will win these elections. It purposely carves up communities so that these districts are drawn to guarantee a political advantage, either for that direct politician or for an entire political party. And the really dire consequences of this is, because this process is only done once every 10 years, the people who happen to be elected during that 0-0 year, during 2020, are the ones who then will manipulate these lines to give themselves the advantage for the next 10 years worth of elections.
So we saw that you posted something on Facebook and said, I'm mad about gerrymandering, who's with me? What prompted you to do that?
Actually, unfortunately, it's a lot of the circumstances that we're seeing right now. In Michigan, we had the Flint water crisis. I know Little Miss Flint was another honoree, which is like just amazing to be honored next to her too. But in Flint, what a lot of people don't realize is that the roots of how the Flint water crisis happened actually are in gerrymandering. There was a law in Michigan passed called the Emergency Manager Law, that when a city was in financial distress, the governor could appoint a manager, and they would pretty much act as the mayor and the city council to make financial decisions for that city. The people of Michigan actually didn't like this law after it started being implemented. There was a clear targeting of Black and brown communities. It was not an equally applied law. And so the people of Michigan went to repeal that law. They were successful, went on the ballot box. Overwhelmingly, people said, yep, this law hasn't been working, let's get rid of it. But that was right when the new gerrymandering was happening right after 2010. And the newly gerrymandered in State House and State Senate decided that they knew better than the people of the state. They found a loophole that could ignore the citizen veto, and they reinstated that emergency manager law. That emergency manager law changed who made the decisions in Flint. And the person who was there had no idea, of course, that they were going to end up poisoning an entire city and killing people, but decided for a financial reason to switch where the water source of Flint came from. It's also a quickly made decision without enough research done. And then being somebody who was recently out of college and one of my first jobs in Michigan and seeing the response, this is very clear to me that a series of elected official decisions led to this extremely unfortunate crisis. And yet everybody who was an elected politician was pointing the finger saying it was somebody else's fault. No one was taking accountability when literal lives had been impacted for now decades, because lead lives in your body once you get it. So, and you can pass it on to your children, which, like, you know, you're hearing this and you're going to work and you feel like you want to make a difference, and yet you just feel helpless. You're like, what the heck can I do? Like, I don't know what to do as a person in Michigan. And one thing I kept thinking about while going to work every morning was just the fact that even after Flint, nothing changed. Like nothing changed to prevent the next Flint water crisis. And I started trying to think about, you know, what are one of those ways we can actually hold elected officials accountable? What are one of those ways where I know if I put my effort towards this, it's going to make a difference? I personally felt like voting is super important, but with the current political system and the way that it functions, honestly, it didn't feel like no matter who gets elected, it would really make that much of a difference. And so that's why I wanted to go after, like, well, what if we look at our election systems and how they're actually run? And so I decided, well, that's gerrymandering. I knew about gerrymandering. I hadn't ever done anything about it before because I think I didn't really know how. I made this Facebook post that said, hey, I want to end gerrymandering in Michigan. I was seeing a lot of my friends and family in the 2016 election were getting motivated politically for the first time. And that was around either President Trump or Bernie Sanders. And when I tried to think about, like, I wonder why all of my friends who normally never pay attention to politics are starting to, when I looked at those core messages that I saw in yards across Michigan, either drain the swamp or the political revolution, I saw that both of those things had kind of a similar mentality, although I will say that people representing those ideas had very different ideas on how to accomplish them. But the idea was, this system is so screwed up, we have to tear it down. Like, we either need to, like, fully drain it, or we need to have the revolution, or whatever that is. And I thought, you know, electing somebody can maybe do that, but also maybe if we change the laws that, like, are the systemic reasons why we can't hold politicians accountable, maybe that's another way to hold the revolution, drain the swamp, but actually just literally fix the system.
Any idea about the response that you would get when you made that Facebook post?
No, I just want to say I don't have a lot of, like, Facebook friends. They're moderate, I think, like a moderate amount. Did not think it would lead to a political movement, did not think that it would lead to a constitutional amendment. After people started responding, I actually had to Google, how do you end gerrymandering? I just knew it was bad and I wanted to do something about it. I wasn't even sure how. And then we started figuring it out together.
So what was your political experience before that Facebook post?
Yeah, I mean, before that, I voted consistently. I really paid attention to local elections just because my background was in the environment and in best practices for businesses when it comes to how you treat people and how you treat the environment. So I knew that a lot of local decision makers made an impact, but honestly, I was just an informed voter. And I would comment on Facebook, I guess, and social media on how I personally felt and why I felt that way. And I'd want to have discussions, but had never been involved in a political campaign, had never passed a law or really even understood how an individual could help make that happen. Complete outsider. But I knew that our state constitution and our nation's constitution said that all political power was inherent in the people, that this government's supposed to be for, by, and of the people. So I knew that the privilege I have of being born in this country is I do have the opportunity to try and change it. And that's I think what gave me enough, I guess, audacity to try and actually do something about it.
So you now have all these people saying, yeah, I'll join you. What do you do? How do you mobilize them? What kind of steps do you take to now create a movement?
What I quickly saw was that I wasn't alone and feeling alone, like the only one who really wanted to do something big about this, which is really exciting. Like I said, I didn't at first know what to do, so we Googled it, and we found on Ballotpedia that there were a couple different options. In Michigan, we have the Citizens Ballot Initiative, which means that if citizens write constitutional language, gather a bunch of signatures for qualifying for the ballot in 2018. It was 315,654 registered Michigan voter signatures in 180 days. Then we could put that law and put it up to the people to vote on. You could kind of bypass the legislature in that way and just have all the people voting in a general election vote for it. We also could have tried to work with the legislature. When we did our research, we saw that there was over 17 times that the legislature had tried to work on gerrymandering, but every single time it was either done by the Democrats while Republicans were in office or done by the Republicans when Democrats were in office, never had bipartisan support and never even got voted on. So it was clear that politicians were not taking this seriously, which makes sense because this is an issue where they'd be giving themselves less power. So we understood that. And the third option was a lawsuit. You could say that the maps had been gerrymandered, meaning the maps were drawn to particularly look at a type of person, either racially gerrymandered by looking at people's races or by looking at their political party, a partisan gerrymander, and say, you know, we think these were drawn illegally. But the thing with the lawsuit, although they're very important, they can make a lot of change, it doesn't change the process. It doesn't change who is drawing the lines or how those lines are being drawn or why they're being drawn. And so that's why we went with the ballot initiative process where we could really redesign the whole thing. We just started with figuring out what each of us could contribute. I knew that I wasn't a lawyer and had no idea how to write constitutional language, but I did know how to talk to people and how to make a project plan. We had people who came up, some who were musicians, and so we said, well, we've got to educate a lot of people about gerrymandering, so can you help us make a song about what that would look like? We had people who could cut clipboards for us to gather petitions on because they were wood carvers. And by slowly figuring out what each of us could contribute, and then also looking at that big plan of like, okay, we know that we have to write language, we have to get signatures, and we have to get people to know what this is so they know whether they want to vote on it or not. We were able to slowly build that organization over time. And we always tried to keep it about what we were about, creating a system that was fair and that everybody had the chance to participate in. So we worked really hard to make sure that people could collaborate online, offline, in person, no matter what part of the state they were in, whether rural or urban. We were going to find a way that you could be a part of changing our Constitution, because at the end of the day, it now impacts every person who lives in Michigan.
So, you know, we live right now in a very divided country. And how were you able to get people across the political spectrum to participate with you? And if you did, what's the magic for that?
Yeah, we were. It was pretty amazing. And actually it was really great because part of me wanting to do something too is I just didn't want to talk about politicians, and I was really scared to go to Thanksgiving dinner. That's pictures of me and my mom. Because my family is very politically divided, and I just was so sick of us calling each other out for who we voted for and saying that we were evil because we felt that way, when I really knew that a lot of us aren't evil, we just maybe view things differently. So for this issue in particular, from day one, we made it just about fighting for everybody to have to not be discriminated against based on who you vote for. And by not having people identify whether they were a Democrat or Republican or independent from the beginning, that actually made it so that you didn't know. A lot of us were complete strangers we had never met before. So all we knew is that we all cared about wanting a fair system in Michigan. Also with that, we quickly realized too that although political talking heads, the folks we see on TV, the politicians that are elected, they have, you know, pretty strong opinions. They make a lot of blanket statements, but that the reality is that people who vote that way, people who vote as a Democrat or vote as a Republican, it's not that they automatically think or believe everything that a talking head politician is saying. Actually, the truth was a lot more complicated than that. A lot of people might like one or two things, but don't actually like a lot of other things that party or person stands for. And what we overwhelmingly saw, that at least people in Michigan, and now that I've been able to help work with people across the country on this issue, everybody wanted a system that was fair. They wanted a system that really led politicians to being accountable to the people they're supposed to be representing. It's like that foundational building block of our democracy that's in our Declaration of Independence and in Michigan in our state constitution. It opens up all political power is inherent in the people. And people really did believe that. And regardless of who you voted for, nobody was happy with the political system. Maybe they blamed Democrats or they blamed Republicans, but in general, they knew it was broken and they wanted to do something about it. And so by starting there and saying, are you happy with the state of politics? and then being able to go into, did you know we're actually able to do something to try and make this a little less corrupt, to try and make our politicians more accountable, to try and make sure that this is focused on us, the people, instead of special interests. That's what really got people excited. And it was beautiful. We would talk to people at doors and they'd be like, hold on, I don't know what it was Proposition 2 is what we were fighting for. And they're like, I don't know what that is, but I see that my neighbor across the street, who I don't agree with on anything, has a sign in their street. And by the time we'd be done talking to them, they'd say, I want a sign too. I had no idea we agreed on anything. And I think when you focus more on issues rather than labels, that's how you start making some of that progress. That's where you can focus on, okay, how do we have common ground? What's important to both of us? What's a real solution going to look like? Instead of discounting somebody just based on skin color or a political party that they vote for. You could really get to like what people actually cared about.
Yeah, so I recommend to everyone who is with us today this film, Slay the Dragon, which is a documentary about partisan gerrymandering, and Katie's story is one storyline that this documentary follows. There's a point in the documentary where you're posting a video online, I'm assuming to your supporters, and you're tearful. You're really frustrated. What was that moment? What prompted you to post that? What during the campaign made you feel so frustrated?
So for me, when we started, it's not that I wasn't cynical about the political process. I very much was. But I think I knew that I couldn't live with myself and in a state like Michigan anymore, knowing I wasn't trying to do everything I possibly could to change it, because I didn't want to wake up to another Flint water crisis. And so that energy definitely propelled us. And as we were going across the state and seeing that more and more people also wanted to change this, it started feeling like it was really real that we could do it. I mean, in the beginning, we wanted to do it, but we were kind of like, well, we've got to try, but who knows if we could. And after gathering all those signatures, we actually did it in record time. We got people from every county in the state, that's never been done before, to sign this petition saying, yes, I want it to be on. It was clear that the people of Michigan wanted this. But with the political process, we were then sent to the Supreme Court. There was an opposition group that before we even had the language finished being written, who said, you know what, we think that we can control the court, and so we're going to sue them, and they're probably going to get thrown off there, so don't bother paying attention to them. So true to their word, they did that. And with the court in Michigan, who had most recently been gerrymandering, and Democrats and Republicans have gerrymandered in Michigan, but most recently it had been the Republican Party. And 5 of our Supreme Court justices were nominated by the Republican Party, and 2 were nominated by the Democrat Party, which doesn't necessarily mean that they went rule in our favor, except that then all of these news articles started coming out that immense political pressure was being put on 2 justices who were up for election, that if they didn't follow the party line and vote against us, that they were going to not be able to be nominated by the party. And we found out that the people who were bringing the lawsuit against us, the wife of the person bringing the lawsuit against us, actually had worked for 5 of those justices. So you're in a system where you really hope that the justice system is going to look at the law, is going to look at our state constitution and make a ruling on that. Not because they like us, not because they like our opposition, but because that's what the law says. And yet, you know, all of these conflicts of interest exist. You know the reality of the power that these 7 people have. If they had ruled against us, all of the hard work of thousands of people who are dedicating their time, their energy, their money, who are making clipboards and driving across the state to because we couldn't afford mailing the petitions. So we literally meet in parking lots and hand them to each other. Like all of that effort, it felt like it would have been kind of for nothing. Like that we had done everything right, yet we get thrown out for this partisan interest. And so that was right the day we had gotten the lawsuit. And I was trying to think about how to talk to everybody about what is the thing we can do in this moment when it feels like all despair is lost. But I think I had a very real moment of just like, you know, I don't know that it's going to work out. Like, I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea if our justices are going to rule fairly. And I was just feeling the weight too of being a leader. I think all of us as leaders, every decision you make could potentially mean that either millions of people have to still live with gerrymandered maps, or the thousands of people who've dedicated that time and energy and money, maybe their efforts didn't lead to what they should have because you made the wrong call. And that's really powerful. I think it's part of what I think about a lot in these situations too, watching leaders who deal with this. And if they aren't taking that weight and responsibility seriously, then they should not be leaders. And so that was that moment. But I thankfully, no spoiler alert a little bit, and I hope everybody does watch Slay the Dragon, but Justice Elizabeth Clement was one of those people who voted based on the Constitution, even though she was up for election, and her fundraising team dropped her afterwards. The person who was running with her as a fellow Republican dropped her afterwards. But she said, I was elected and became a judge because I'm supposed to rule based on our Constitution. And our Constitution says that all political power is inherent in the people. And clearly this is what the people want. So we need to let them vote on it. And that afterwards too, to just see that there are people who are genuine in politics and in our justice system. It is not everyone at all, but that sometimes it will work out and they do prevail. And we need to support, I think, that and show up and show that we are real people. One of the comments that was made afterwards was from one of the justices that we got to talk to. They said that the only day that the Michigan Supreme Court was filled, because we had it filled and we had 400 people outside all protesting, wanting their right to vote. They said the only day that the court was filled was the day that our case was heard. And they said, don't think we didn't notice that real people wanted this to be happening.
Excellent. And you won.
And we won.
Yeah. How was that moment? What was that like?
That was
well, that it works. It actually, the system works.
Yeah, it was so surreal. And it honestly, I mean, I think in moments when you see such systemic failure, you do question, is democracy, is our government, is this country, is this the thing we want to fight for? Like, what is it worth it? Is it even possible? And I think on election night, I knew that no matter what, like the whole day I was actually pretty calm and cool and collected, because I was like, I know that there's literally over 6,000 of us who are working day to day, and we had over 16,000 people who supported the campaign. But there are 6,000 people in Michigan who have worked tirelessly, who literally couldn't have done anything else. We had no more money. We had no more energy. We had done literally everything. And so I was like, either way that the election turns out, I am proud knowing that we did everything we could. So at least at the end of the day, we know, can people prevail or can't they? And so then to see that we were successful, that we were able to navigate those political challenges, the opposition money and lies that were set against us, all of the reasons we were told that we weren't going to be successful, to see that and feel that, it just was amazing. And I think the coolest part too was on November 6, 2018, Michigan, Utah, Colorado, and Missouri, voters in all of those states, millions of voters, all stood up to say, we want fair maps. All of those states had independent redistricting commissions or some kind of fair map proposal on, and they all overwhelmingly passed, which was just incredible. And then you could start dreaming too about, I remembered being in school and learning about gerrymandering, and on election night, I have this really distinct memory of just thinking about all the fourth graders in Michigan now are still unfortunately going to have to learn about gerrymandering because most states in our country still have it. But they're also going to hear about how thousands of people in their state thought that they deserved a better future, fought to make that happen, and now they can make sure that these lines are drawn fairly and with integrity. And they, when they're 18, can apply to be one of these commissioners who will actually draw those lines, because the fact that they live in Michigan makes them qualified enough to be at the center of our democracy. And just being able to think about that impact and knowing that we kept our integrity, that we designed this constitutional amendment not for a short-term game, not to just try and benefit one party, but we designed language that would help Michigan voters for generations to come. In 40 years, no matter what the political parties look like, this is a system that is really designed to be for the people in 40 years. And this year, it'll be for the people who live in Michigan now. And that's a pretty incredible feeling.
Yeah, so I want to invite people who are with us to post your questions in the chat. And as those begin to gather, tell us about The People, this new organization that you founded that takes what you've done and what you've learned national.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things in Michigan that we started seeing was that because we were political outsiders and we had never done this before, there were so many barriers to figuring out the political process, from how the heck do you report campaign finance donations, to how do you write constitutional language, to trying to get hearings. When you're writing the language, you have to get your petition approved. And because nobody knew who we were, they didn't take us seriously. And a process that normally takes 48 hours ended up taking 53 days. And that was eating up the summer. And for us in Michigan, we have very, very cold winters. So trying to stand on the street corner gathering petitions in the winter is horrible. So knowing that the summer was taken away from us, all because we didn't have political inside connections and nobody thought that we were worthwhile to make sure that their summer vacation was broken up, those kinds of things were really bothersome. The other thing we learned pretty quickly too is that when it comes to political activism, there's been so much effort and money put into the partisanship that there's a lot of tools for you if you're working on something that's for a Democrat, or a lot of tools if you're working for something that's on a Republican. But if you're genuinely trying to work on something that's truly nonpartisan, the websites, the way you collect donations, how you go door to door and knock on things, there's hardly any genuinely nonpartisan solution. So we created a lot. We created apps to figure out how to do door knocking. We created databases that wouldn't sell information to political parties. And that was only because we had all these amazing volunteers deciding and working really hard to do that. So afterwards, we wanted to pay it forward basically to the rest of the country and say, we spent all this time creating this, so hopefully nobody else ever has to, because it's already really hard to change a law and to talk to millions of people about gerrymandering. You shouldn't fail just because you don't know how to navigate the political process, because that doesn't happen to be your day job. And so that's what the People's focused on. How do we connect people who care about the same issues, who want to do something about it? And how do we help provide a process that will make sure that you can remain nonpartisan, but also make sure that you know all those insider tricks and the loopholes that you might just not realize because you're brand new to the process, and give access to tools and resources to make sure people can be successful while trying to make the country a better place. So it's been pretty incredible so far to see just how many Americans also are feeling that way of, I want to do something, I'm not exactly sure how to do it or what to do, but I'm raising my hand saying I'm ready. It's a shared feeling much beyond just Michigan's border.
Yeah. So what qualities do you think people should focus on in themselves when they want to do human rights advocacy? What qualities of personality or strengths do you think that make good advocates?
I think you have to be a great listener. Right now, there are so many people who don't feel heard because they aren't heard, who are frustrated because they have real life circumstances and systemic oppression, but also just systemic failure from government all the way down to, other institutions. And part of why I think we see so much anger right now is because of that lack of being heard. And to really hear somebody, sometimes our words convey something that we don't mean, like the root of what we're trying to say doesn't come out. I'm classic with that. I just kind of sometimes start talking and then I'm like, wait, that's not really what it means. And to be a listener and to really hear the intent of what somebody is saying and to try and be able to help translate what that means, but also help them understand the power that they have, I think that's just an incredibly undervalued skill right now. I think also openness and not being afraid to say what you don't know. None of us, part of what I think is really great about democracy is that theoretically, all these differences of opinions, when we work together, can create an even better solution than any one of us could have created on our own. But that's not always how the decision-making process happens. But for leaders in this space, or for activists who want to be in this space, I really think being open and really trying to bring people into the table, making sure that you're going to the communities who are most impacted, you're going to your neighbors, you're going to people who, especially if you're changing laws, are going to be impacted by those laws, and inviting them into the process and saying, hey, here's how I'm going to make sure I'm working extra hard so that you can be at the table too. That's so needed because there's such distrust. There's distrust between people right now, and there's distrust with institutions for, again, very good reasons. The only way I think personally to rebuild that trust is actually involving people in that process, letting them see and also have their voices and opinions be part of crafting that solution that's going to work, because they have the real lived experience of what it means to live with these system failures, but like government failures, election failures, all of that.
Right. One of our attendees asked, who are some of your influences? So who have been people that you've looked to for inspiration or who have shaped your approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably like everybody. Kathy, with redistricting in particular, Kathy Fung is amazing. She's out of Common Cause in California. In California, they actually had to, I think it was like 4 or 5 times, try and pass a ballot initiative. And she's just such a fighter for the people and really means what she says when she's going to show up to make sure communities are heard. When we were first starting, like I was saying, nobody would help us. A lot of the existing organizations that even cared about redistricting kind of said, you're a group of internet strangers. Like, if you want to join us, we'll lead the way. But, you know, how serious are you really? And when we asked for help, they kind of said, you know, we're busy. And Kathy didn't, even though she's in an entirely different state, is a leader for Common Cause, like nationally. And she took the time to call, to coach, to make sure that we were supported. And I just felt like that was so needed. And she raises up other leaders too. Somebody that's really cool that I got to meet, and we were going through the journey kind of at the same time, but on a different issue, was Desmond Meade in Florida. He was fighting for overturning or getting re-enfranchising felons to be able to vote, because in Florida at the time, even if you had served your time, you would not be able to vote after getting a felony. And he was an example of that. And they also were leading with a very grassroots approach. And him and I both, the times that we would get to meet up, we both just really believe that this has to be about the people, and that if the people aren't leading the change, if instead you have somebody who thinks they're the smartest person or the expert or whatever, trying to tell everybody else what to do, that it's just not going to work. And he really fought for that too. His heart was in making sure that you were doing this because of the reasons you said you were. The fact that people don't have the right to vote, and they should. And for me, it was the fact that people have the right for fair representation and they don't. Like, that's why we were fighting, and we weren't going to let any other interests get in the way of that. And I think he's a great example of that. Yeah.
That's great. I think a lot of people think, you know, they read about the success of a ballot initiative and they think it just happened. You know, how the sausage gets made in a campaign like this, people don't always see behind the curtain to watch what has come together. And so when activists connect like that and are able to share tips and resources, it's really important. Someone asks, how would you encourage someone who doesn't feel like they know enough in politics to get involved?
Totally. So a couple things. One, and I know this sounds super millennial of me, but I'll own it. Google it. Like, literally, Google is amazing. Ballotpedia is like really great. They help lay out like the rules in your state on how you can make change. Again, don't be afraid to say that though too. Like, it is okay to feel like you don't know what you're doing, because you aren't paid to do this every single day, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be here. And it doesn't mean that you don't deserve to fight and that your voice isn't important. Your voice is still just as important, even if your civics class didn't teach you how to do a ballot initiative, which mine didn't. The other thing is, there are really amazing organizations across the country who have spent decades fighting for these different issues, and they can often help you get up to speed and understand, like, what are the basics of what this looks like. I think always approaching solutions and even activism with a sense of humility, I personally think is important. I don't know that everybody has to follow that, but it's helped me, just because I don't know what I don't know. And so being able to go in, wanting to listen, and being able to respond to somebody, showing that I heard them, but also then being able to advocate from my own perspective of, well, here's my lived experience, and also here's what I know. I think that can be really effective. And I don't always, with how much anger and like passion all of us feel, I think it's easy for that step to get overlooked, of like genuinely trying to interact with somebody because you're trying to find common ground, and you're also seeing if your interests are aligned because you want to fight together. Thepeople.org, the organization I've started, that's why we're here. We want to help people figure out where is their role, what's the thing that they can do to make change. And I think regardless of what your skill set or your knowledge, there's a really huge opportunity to learn. And thankfully, there's a lot of great organizations and resources that can help you do that.
Yeah, we have put up The People. This is the website. If you want to connect with them, we hope you will. Someone asked, how do you continue to find ways to have an impact during the coronavirus?
Yeah. So one of the nice things about our campaign is because it was started through a Facebook post, we actually didn't have like in-person meetings for like probably 3 or 4 months into it. We were only organizing online. Only organizing online can be an issue because not everybody has access to the internet. So it is not fully comprehensive at all. But it actually can, in other ways, add a lot of equality, especially for people in maybe more rural places or people who don't have access to transportation. Being able to connect online was a really powerful way. We used Facebook, but we also used like Google Docs and Google Suite, which are like free tools where you can like work on a Word like type of paper together and use spreadsheets together. And we use like Trello, and there's a fair number of like free tools for people where you can collaborate. What was nice about that too is people, whether working or not, or even just like with their own family situations, at different times of the day were available. Some people came to me and they're like, I don't know if I can volunteer because I can only work from 4 a.m. till 7 a.m. And we're like, actually, it's, you know, here's the things that we need done. And if you want to just make sure you post about it afterwards and share your update at 4 in the morning, you know, I might read it at 9 in the morning, but that works really well. And we'd love to have that happen. So I think that's one way. One of the biggest things I can say, though, is I really think finding a network of other people who feel passionately like you is really important. That Facebook post, what's really funny is if anybody's on social media, there's often like a thing that will show you what you posted a couple of years previously. So apparently, and I do not remember doing this, like 3 years earlier, I had actually made the same exact Facebook post, except it was like linked to an article that said like, hey, I want to do something about gerrymandering. Who wants to help? And not a single person liked it. No one. Nobody liked it. The other thing, though, that's actually even more important is I didn't do anything about it. I didn't go and try and start a constitutional amendment. I didn't even decide to go volunteer with an organization that was working on it. Like, me feeling alone, like nobody else cared, also made me feel like, well, maybe there's nothing I can do. And so just trying to connect with people, and I think right now, whether it's social media or other, again, nonprofit organizations or places that are fighting on the issues that you care most about, there are probably other people who feel just as passionately as you do. And if you can start with finding them, then I think go and try and work together to figure out how do we, what's the place to start. And I also want to say too, every community, every state has some way that not only gerrymandering or the census, but the issues you care about, I'm sure there are communities in your state being impacted, even if yours directly isn't, and they need somebody helping make sure that they have a fair and just system.
Yeah. What is, if people, you know, the one thing that is remarkable is how much you now know about gerrymandering. And so it seems that becoming an expert on your issue would be part of this, that if you are concerned about something, one of the things would be to really go learn more, and Googling it is a great place to start. How else did you become an expert?
100%, yeah. So, and that's a huge part of it. Don't try and change something if you have not done the work to understand what the unintended consequences are, because you could have the best intentions in the world, but let's say you try and change a law, or like in our case, if we're changing the Constitution, that's really hard to change again. So you better make sure that that solution is really well thought through research and is going to have the intended outcome that you want it to. So there's lots of organizations that focus on different types of research. If it's redistricting in general, the Brennan Center for Justice is a great place. They've studied places where there's been independent redistricting commissions and studied those laws, what their impacts were. There's lots of different political science resources too. A lot of these organizations, again, who maybe are about the issue that you care most about, they will have a lot of that research, and I would start there. I'd start, and with that, it's not just even knowing about the issue. So it's not about like, okay, what really is gerrymandering? And like, to just be fully honest, I was like, which lives does gerrymandering impact? When we started, like, I was like, is it our senator too? But it's not, because everybody votes for the senator. But like, I needed that reminder. It's not like I just knew all of it. Again, I knew it was bad and I knew a lot of the other reasons, but the actual details that are extremely important when you go to fix it, I needed a Civics 101 refresher. Those organizations will have that. And I'll also say that looking into your own state's history is important too. Us taking the time to research to see 17 different times our legislature had tried to pass a law, but it never even went anywhere and it never had bipartisan support. That helped inform our decision to know that the ballot initiative was the right direction to go. This can often be found online. Reading old political articles from like years before about that issue, news reporters covering like your state politics can be really helpful. The other thing too is once you find some other people who care about it, you know, you could come up with a plan together of what you want to research and help share, because it makes it a little less overwhelming. I only know this because we had lots of different people who were able to help. And the last thing that I think is important is a lot of people who are in this work want other people to be successful. They care about it, not because they're just being paid to care about it, and many of us aren't being paid to care about it, but also just because they know that it's literally like life and death, but also right and wrong, and like the core of our country. So in 2016, when we were starting this, Illinois and I think it was North Dakota had both unfortunately had campaigns that lost trying to end gerrymandering in their state. And so I called them and I said, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're trying to do this here. Do you have any lessons that you learned? Can you help us? And they sent over materials. They talked to us about what they thought went wrong with their campaign, what they thought went right, and just gave tips. And I just started documenting every single tip that I got so that we could always refer back to it, and the little, you know, the things to look out for. And I think as long as you're like documenting that, making sure that you're reaching out to a lot of people, there's a lot of people who want to help you figure out how to make change in your state.
Great. So Katie, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you as part of our Power to Inspire family. I hope everyone who has been involved in this today will go to thepeople.org and get involved in Katie's work. She will help anyone who wants to get involved to learn how, so please do support thepeople.org. This Power to Inspire series is designed to spotlight advocates who are making change. And this event for the past 6 years has always been our main fundraising event. So if you would like to make a donation, our donation website will provide you with the, on the screen right now, is where you can go to get involved. It's the center powertoinspire.org. You will be joining our donors who we've just listed again and who we again offer our thanks. Our next Power to Inspire event will be with Dr. Dennis Mukwege. We are still working on the date, so we will keep you posted on that. Dr. Mukwege is featured in our human rights exhibition at the center. He's a world-renowned gynecologist and human rights activist from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he also won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for his work advocating for women who have suffered sexual violence. He's also leading the COVID response in his region of Congo. So we're working with him to nail down a date, and we will keep you posted on that. As we close, I hope you will all be on the lookout next week for an email from us that will explain how you can become involved in our campaign for equal dignity. This work ahead, it requires all of us. And so we look forward to having you join us. With that, we will sign off for this edition of the Power to Inspire Awards. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.